Hi, I'm Evan, and today I'm going to demo using Anakari to create more of a melodic instrument. The instrument for my last demo was a guitar effect and didn't really make use of a MIDI keyboard. Today I'm going to make a multi-timbral instrument using a MIDI keyboard. So you'll notice I'm in Ableton here, and that's because I'm taking advantage of Ableton's built-in tuner. Anakari will eventually have its own built-in tuner, but that's not implemented yet, so I'm going to use the one from Ableton. Okay, so I'm changing to the camera mode that's orthogonal on the y-axis, and that's just so I can create easily a string of masses that are all going to be lined up. And I have grid snapping enabled, and that's why they came out of this like perfect grid spacing. I could disable that if I wanted something more organic, but I don't. Now I'm just going to connect each of those with springs. For the instrument I have in mind, I'm going to just make a couple changes here right away. I want these springs to be shorter. Now, keep in mind, we didn't see any visual change in the spring length because these springs are all opposing each other, being pulled between these two anchor points. And so making this length that the spring wants to be shorter doesn't really affect anything visually. It just makes them tighter because they're trying to pull more tightly now. I'm also going to change their stiffness. Make them pretty stiff, and then make this mass really small and increase the damping. So those are just some ideas I have. I kind of know what effects those might have, but you could arrive here for your experimentation as well. So let's go back to that 3D view and see what this thing looks like. Okay, it looks about like what I thought. Okay, now let's add a microphone. Oops, I want it there. Great. We're going to connect it to this mass on the end. And then I'm going to create an exciter. So in this case, a mallet. And that looks, let's move it over here. And I'm going to connect it to several of these masses. By connecting it to these three masses, it means that when this mallet strikes, it'll hit all three of these. You could connect it to, all of them, none of them, one of them. In each, way that you connect things is going to get a different timbral result. But I'm just going to connect it to these ones kind of in the middle here. And let's see what this sounds like. Maybe I'll turn the mic gain down here before we see how loud it is. Okay, let's turn that gain up a little bit. Yeah, kind of a clicking sound. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to decrease the damping so the system will ring out a bit more. Let's go even further. A little bit more damping. Okay, now I'm going to duplicate this exciter. And because I selected the three connection lines, it duplicated those. If I just select the exciter and duplicate it, I just get that. But in this case, I wanted to duplicate the connections as well. And I'm going to change this new exciter from being a mallet to being an oscillator. Now, one thing to note is that Anakari automatically incremented the MIDI note. In this case, I don't want that. If you're making an instrument with lots of voices, that auto incrementing comes in handy. But in this case, I want both of these to strike with the same MIDI key. Now I'm going to change this to a white noise generator. And remember, white noise compared to like a sine or a square wave or whatever that has a definite pitch, white noise kind of just puts energy into the system and allows it to oscillate at its own natural mode of vibration. So let's hear that. You can kind of hear a little bit, but let's turn this up, gain up a little bit. Let's give it a little bit of a longer release. There we go. You can kind of hear this ringing sound now. And I'm going to decrease the attack, decrease the sustain a bit, maybe a little bit longer release. A little bit more gain. I'm going to decrease the impulse on this mallet just a little bit. Okay, so now what we have is this kind of ringing bell sound. And then a little bit of noise that kicks in. Great. Okay. So actually, these are below. I'm going to move these up here, kind of get them over to the side instead of below the system. And the reason for that is I'm going to now start duplicating this thing. So now that MIDI note auto incrementing is helpful. Now keep in mind, the MIDI note changed, but the pitch of the system didn't change. And the reason for that is that it's just simulating this physical system. There's mass parameter, the stiffness of the springs, the length of the springs. There could be other factors, depending on what you've built. And the pitch of the system just, varies based on all those physics parameters. Right now, Anakari does not know how to tune those for you. Eventually, a feature I really want to add is some form of auto tuning, where you can tell Anakari, for some subsystem, this one or this one, I want this tuned to a particular note, and you'll be able to give it some constraints, like you're allowed to change the spring stiffness, for example, or you're allowed to change the mass or both or the spring length. And within those constraints, it will then change parameters around and try and get the system tuned to a particular pitch. I think this will be really handy because then, you can create like a big 88 key keyboard really quickly and easily. Whereas right now you actually have to tune it a little bit like you tune a guitar. You have to go through manually and change those parameters yourself to get the pitches you want. Anyways, that's what we're going to do today. So I'm only going to make a small instrument, but I'm just going to kind of duplicate these things. We're just going to go with 5 notes. So that'll be really easy and quick to tune. So these are mapped chromatically. And I guess actually I'll map those to the white keys because I just want to, I don't want a chromatic scale. So I'm going to change these. Let's see here. So this will be D, these will be E, these will be F, and these will be G. Now keep in mind, I'm just changing the mappings on the keyboard. It doesn't change the pitch because that's something I'm going to have to tune manually. Now before I tune it manually, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to connect these systems together in some way. So right now, all these systems are totally disconnected. They have no influence on each other. And so if I hold Alt and click, which lets you select a connected subunit, I can select each of these individually. That's kind of handy. But if we were only creating these disconnected units, we're not really taking advantage of the fact that Anakari is this big physics simulation. You could imagine just sampling one of them and using that. It's a lot more interesting if they can sort of influence each other and have these energy go back and forth between them. So I'm going to do that this way. I'm going to take a spring, let's say from here to here, and I'm going to repeat that all the way up. And maybe I'll do this direction too. Why not? So let's see, let's strike one of them. Now you can see if you look at the microphones, and this is something I didn't explain super clearly in the last video, the microphones light up based on the audio signal level, which I guess is maybe kind of obvious, but so now when I just press one of these notes, the bottom one, all of the microphones are lighting up a little bit. And that's because some energy is being transferred back and forth by these springs going across. Okay, so now that that's set up, I'm going to tune the instrument. And it's pretty important, by the way, that we added these cross springs before tuning it. Because the thing is, because it is one big dynamic system, if we add connections between the different voices in this way, it's going to affect the tuning. So if we tuned all of these things and then added the springs, we're going to find that the instrument is out of tune. And this kind of makes sense. I mean, if you build something and then connect more things to it, you shouldn't expect it to resonate at the same frequency. But so we've added those springs and we have energy going back and forth. In fact, I'm going to make these springs a little bit looser, I think. Not that loose. Okay. I don't want too much energy bleeding back and forth, or else we're not going to be able to get distinct pitches from each of these subunits. So let's try and tune it. And we're going to use the Ableton tuner. We may have to make these crosslinks a little bit weaker. We'll see. So let's go for it. So I'm going to use the spring stiffness. Oh, and I'm going to have to deselect these ones. Okay, so the spring stiffness is 1,000,000 right now. And this thing looks like a kind of an A sharp. Let's go down from here. Okay, it looks like we kind of got to see. The tuner's a bit noisy because it's, it's not like this thing just has one sine wave pitch. It's got a lot of complexity. Yeah, we'll call that a C. Maybe a little bit more tension. Close enough. In an instrument like this with all this cross influence, getting the pitch perfect isn't really going to matter that much anyways. And in fact, having a little bit of out of tuneness can make it sound kind of cool. So let's make this a D. Oop, gotta deselect these cross springs because I don't want to adjust them. So let's hear that C. Ableton Tuner is not working quite as well as I'd like it to. Well, it's D enough. Maybe we'll come back and make it closer later. Let's try and get an E. Well, the Ableton Tuner is kind of failing us here, so I'm just going to do it by ear. That sounds about right to me. Okay. Yeah, so we have an instrument here. I think, we might need to do something a little bit different than Ableton does with their tuner for Anakari, given that so much of the time we're dealing with these, bell-like sounds, chime-like sounds that have inharmonic partials. But in this case, by ear and maybe with a little bit of help from Ableton, we can get it sort of right. And let's make a couple adjustments to this system now. Let's see. I'm not sure I like how this is working. So let's maybe make the attack and decay shorter. Let's play with the damping. Okay, I kind of like that click sound. And so now I'm going to go back to the oscillators, maybe increase their gain and increase their release again. This might sound nice. Maybe I'll try turning on the arpeggiator on my keyboard. This might be a weird idea. Yeah, okay. Well, what else might we do here? I think one thing that might be kind of fun is let's take all of the exciters and notice that they're pointed perfectly along this axis that the microphone's on, and I'm going to change that. I'm going to put them on maybe kind of off kilter. So now they're sort of up diagonally. Let's see how that sounds. Okay, it sounds pretty much the same. And I think that's because we didn't do anything to the microphones. It was a little bit quieter, and that's because the microphones, less of the energy from these is exactly on the axis of the microphones. So let's grab the microphones. Okay, we're going to have to do this fairly manually. I'm going to add a modulator. We'll just kind of stick it over here somewhere. And this thing, I'm going to connect it to each of the microphones. And I'm going to turn this into an LFO. Okay, now I think I want them moving up and down instead of left to right. And maybe not that much. We'll see. We'll experiment. Okay, it's kind of subtle. I like it. I'm going to add another modulator. I'm going to just duplicate this one to get one kind of in the same spot. I'm going to connect this to these masses. Now, if I was really smart, or if I was building a larger instrument, what I would have liked to do is create each of these modulators when I created the first string down here. And then when I copied and pasted or duplicated these other parts of the instrument, they'd automatically be connected to this modulator. So I wouldn't have to come back and connect it to each one. With only 5 voices, it's no big deal, but yeah, it could be a little bit annoying with more. Eventually, I'm going to add features where you can select these, right-click, connect all to, and then just drag one line and connect it, and that'll make that sort of thing a lot easier. So I'm going to select these for the new modulator, and I'm going to have this modulate the mass a little bit of these end things. Let's make it a small amount. Let's just start. Let's hear that. Okay, let's change the frequency. You can hear just a little bit of the pitch moving up and down. And then let's maybe, last thing we could do, let's just play with rotating all of these. I'm going to turn off grid snapping so that I can get smooth rotation. Let's see, what's it sound like over here? Quieter. Maybe here. Okay, well, I think I'm going to end there. I'm going to keep this video from being as super long as the last one. Hopefully this is an interesting look into what it's like to make a polyphonic instrument in Anakari. This is a relatively simple instrument to make an 88 key keyboard. Obviously it's a lot more work, and that's why I'm going to be working to add more features to automate the tuning. Like I mentioned in the last video, obviously it's going to be really nice to have a what I call the duplicate many feature, which will let you select something, copy it, and then create, say 30 duplicates. It'll be a menu that comes up. I want 30 of this. Please tune them to a chromatic scale, and you're allowed to adjust the mass. And then, there might be parameters that say, as you create each duplicate, please connect it back to the original one, stuff like that. And this should make creating these larger instruments a lot easier and faster. But note that even if I were to create a 12 pitch version of this to get a nice 1 octave chromatic scale, it's not that much work. It's like tuning a couple of guitars. Maybe it's kind of like tuning a 12-string guitar, right? Not that I'm a big fan of tuning 12-string guitars. It's one of the things I like least about playing them. But it's one of those things. It's not that big of a deal. And once you get good at it, selecting the right stuff, adjusting the pitch, especially if you have tuned stringed instruments in the past, it's not that big of a deal. But this is something that can be made faster and easier, and I hope to do that, and I actually think that that's not going to be the biggest challenge in Anakari. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hopefully this is informative and interesting. Subscribe to the channel. Come talk to us on Discord. Leave a comment on YouTube. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.